The restaurant buzzed with the comfortable hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint notes of background music. Families gathered over meals, couples leaned across tables, and waiters weaved between chairs with practiced ease. For a moment, it felt like any other evening. But then, the door slammed open with a deafening bang, and everything changed in the blink of an eye. A man stormed in, his face covered by a black mask, his hand clutching a gun that trembled with nervous rage. He grabbed the nearest waitress, yanking her close and pressing the cold barrel against her temple. Her tray clattered to the ground, dishes shattering across the floor. "Don't move, or she dies." His voice cracked with desperation, loud enough to silence the entire restaurant. Screams rang out, chairs scraped as people ducked under tables, and a wave of panic swept through the room. At one corner table, a young girl froze, her small fingers gripping her father's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Daddy, is she going to die?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Her father, a man in his mid-30s with tired eyes and simple clothes that carried the wear of hard work, pulled her closer. He bent his head, his calm whisper a sharp contrast to the chaos around them. "Not if I can help it," he said, his voice steady, almost soothing. His daughter searched his face, and though fear flickered in his eyes, there was no panic, only quiet determination. The gunman dragged the waitress toward the center of the room, waving his weapon wildly. "Nobody move. Nobody call the cops. I'll do it, I swear." The trembling in his voice betrayed him, but his desperation was dangerous. People cried under tables, some clasped hands in silent prayers. The entire room was frozen in fear, except for one man who remained unnervingly calm, the single dad. From another corner, a wealthy CEO sat at a long table, his expensive watch catching the dim light. He had noticed the dad earlier, his worn sneakers, the way his shirt was ironed but fraying at the sleeves. He had leaned toward his companions and whispered with a mocking smirk, "Pathetic. Probably can't even afford a proper suit. What's he even doing here? A man like that doesn't belong in a place like this." His friends chuckled, nodding in agreement, their voices laced with superiority. But now, the same CEO sat frozen, his face pale as the reality of the situation pressed down. His expensive suit couldn't protect him, his title meant nothing in the eyes of the masked gunman. He glanced toward the single dad again, and saw something that unsettled him. While everyone else cowered in terror, the man he mocked only minutes ago was holding his daughter's hand, calm, steady, whispering reassurances to her as though he had walked through storms before and learned how to keep standing. The CEO's breath hitched as he noticed the waitress's shaking legs, her silent sobs muffled by the man's grip. Fear rolled through the room like a heavy fog, yet that father's steady presence seemed to carve out a small island of safety. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't trembling, he wasn't frozen. He was watching, calculating, protective, but calm. The gunman barked again, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. "I said don't move. Anyone tries to play hero, she's dead." He pressed the gun harder against the waitress's temple, and she whimpered, closing her eyes. The little girl squeezed her father's hand tighter. "Daddy, please do something." The father's eyes softened as he looked down at her. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "I will, sweetheart. But you have to trust me." Then he straightened, his jaw tightening, his gaze locking on the man with the gun. The CEO, still trembling, felt a wave of shame. Just minutes ago, he had dismissed this man as nothing, but now he saw something different. It wasn't money or status that mattered in this moment. It was strength of character, the kind that didn't need to be announced or displayed. The kind that spoke through calm eyes and steady hands in the face of danger. The masked man screamed again, his voice echoing against the walls. The restaurant was a cage of silence and fear. The CEO's heart pounded, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move, he couldn't think of anything except survival. But then he glanced once more at the single dad and saw something he hadn't expected, control. Not over the situation, but over himself. And that, more than anything, was what left the CEO speechless. The little girl's fingers clung to her father's sleeve, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't want to let go, but her dad gently pried her hand loose and knelt in front of her. His voice was low, steady, almost like he was reading her a bedtime story, though danger hung in the air like smoke. "Stay here, sweetheart. Daddy's going to fix this. You're safe, I promise." Her lip quivered. But what if? He pressed a kiss to her forehead, silencing her with a tenderness that made her tears spill over. "Shh, trust me." He stood slowly, every movement deliberate, his eyes locked on the gunman. The entire restaurant gasped as the father took a step forward. "Don't!" The gunman screamed, yanking the waitress tighter against his chest. His hand shook, but his finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger. "One more step and she's gone." The dad raised his hands, palms open. His voice carried a calm that seemed impossible in the moment. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." The gunman's eyes darted around the room, wild and desperate. "Talk? You think I want to talk?" His voice cracked, his body trembling. The waitress whimpered, her tears soaking the sleeve of his jacket. "Yes," the father said softly, moving just an inch closer. "I think you do. Because if you really wanted to kill her, you would have already. You don't want to hurt anyone. You just don't see another way out." The words cut through the panic like a quiet blade. The room stilled, even the muffled sobs fell silent. People watched as if time itself had stopped. The gunman's grip faltered slightly, his arm trembling. "Shut up. You don't know me." "You're right," the dad replied gently. "I don't know you, but I know what it looks like when someone's hurting. I've been there." He paused, his eyes softening but never leaving the man's face. "Tell me, who are you trying to protect?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. The gunman blinked, his jaw tightening. His lips trembled, and for the first time, he seemed less like a monster and more like a broken man. My sister," he finally choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of his confession. "She's sick. Hospital bills, they're drowning us. Nobody cares. Nobody helps." I begged, but they laughed. I couldn't watch her die." His chest heaved with sobs, though his grip on the gun remained unsteady. The father's heart ached, but his expression stayed steady, calm. He took another small step forward, speaking with the quiet strength of a man who knew pain. "I lost my wife a few years ago. Cancer. I worked 2 jobs, begged for help too. Most days, I didn't know how I'd keep a roof over my daughter's head. There were nights I wanted to give up. But I couldn't, because she needed me, and your sister needs you." The gunman's breathing faltered, his tears falling freely now. He shook his head, torn between rage and despair. "You don't understand. No one cares unless you force them to." The father lowered his hands slightly, his voice softer than ever. "I care. Right now, in this room, I care. And so do all these people watching you. You don't need to do this. Hurting someone won't heal her. But choosing differently, that can change everything, for her and for you." The waitress whimpered again, but this time the gunman's grip loosened just a little. His hand trembled violently, the barrel of the gun dipping. He looked at the father with eyes that pleaded for someone, anyone, to understand. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, the dad spread his arms wide, stepping closer. "If you have to take someone, take me. But don't let her die, and don't let your soul die with this choice." The gunman's jaw clenched. His finger twitched on the trigger. The entire room froze. The CEO, watching from behind an overturned table, gripped his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. He could barely breathe as he watched the father step right into the line of fire. Seconds stretched into eternity. The father stood unshaken, his chest rising and falling steadily. His daughter's sobs echoed faintly from across the room. The waitress shut her eyes, bracing for the end. And then, it happened. With a guttural cry, the gunman's knees buckled. The weapon clattered to the floor, the sound ringing like thunder in the silence. He released the waitress, who collapsed into a heap of sobs, crawling away from him. The gunman dropped his face into his hands, his body racked with sobs, broken not by force, but by compassion. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, but before they stormed in, the father knelt beside the man. He placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, his voice low. "You're not beyond saving. You just need someone to believe in you. Tonight, let that be me." The doors burst open, officers rushing in with weapons drawn. They pinned the gunman to the ground, but before they could strike him with batons, the father raised his voice. "Stop." He surrendered. He needs help, not punishment. The officers exchanged looks but hesitated, stepping back. The restaurant filled with whispers of disbelief. People stared at the single dad, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The CEO sat frozen, his heart pounding. The man he had laughed at, the one he considered beneath him, had just saved lives, not with strength, not with wealth, but with courage and compassion. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even meet the father's eyes. For the first time in years, the CEO felt small, humbled, and ashamed. And he knew, deep down, that his life would never be the same after what he had just witnessed. The gun lay abandoned on the restaurant floor, its metallic clang still echoing in the shocked silence. Every pair of eyes in the room darted between the trembling gunman and the father who stood unflinching, his arms slowly lowering to his sides. The waitress was free, clinging to another staff member, sobbing in relief. For a moment, the gunman looked like a cornered child rather than a criminal, his shoulders shaking as he buried his face in his hands. The father bent down slowly, close enough that the man could hear his words but gentle enough not to startle him. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "It takes more courage to let go than to pull the trigger." The gunman looked up through red-rimmed eyes, his face streaked with tears. His lips parted as if to speak, but before he could, the restaurant doors flew open. Police officers stormed in, guns drawn, shouting commands. "On the ground, now!" One of them barked. Two officers grabbed the gunman roughly, slamming him down, a knee pressing into his back. He cried out in pain, struggling against the weight. Another officer raised a baton. "Wait!" the father shouted, stepping forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Everyone froze. The police, the gunman, even the terrified diners who had been cowering behind tables. "He surrendered," the father said firmly. "He dropped the gun. He didn't hurt her. He doesn't need more violence. He needs help." The officer hesitated, his baton still raised. The father's steady gaze didn't waver. Finally, the baton lowered. The police cuffed the man, but their aggression softened, their voices quieter. The atmosphere in the room shifted from terror to awe. People began to emerge from hiding, whispering, shaking their heads in disbelief. Who was this man who had walked into the storm unarmed, unafraid, and brought peace where there had only been fear? From the corner, the CEO stood, his legs unsteady as he rose. He felt his throat tighten. Just an hour earlier, he had looked down on this man, mocking him for his worn shoes and cheap shirt. And yet, here he was, the man who had just prevented tragedy, not with money, not with power, but with compassion. The CEO swallowed hard, guilt burning in his chest. His wealth had never given him this kind of strength. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed of the mirror image he carried in his mind. Outside, flashing red and blue lights painted the windows. The father took his daughter's hand, pulling her close. She clung to him, her little body trembling, but her face tilted up with pure trust. "You were so brave, Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He kissed the top of her head, smiling faintly. "Brave is just another word for doing what's right, sweetheart." The gunman was escorted out, his head hung low. But before he disappeared into the night, he looked back, his lips quivering. "Thank you," he mouthed, his voice breaking under the weight of gratitude. The father gave him a small nod, as if to say, "You're still human. Don't forget that." The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the CEO lingered, his heart thudding. He knew he couldn't leave without saying something. He approached, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. For once, he felt like a child approaching a teacher, humbled and uncertain. "Sir," the CEO began, his voice shaking. The father turned, his daughter holding onto his hand. Up close, the CEO saw the tired lines etched in the man's face, the quiet strength in his eyes, the humility that came from years of struggle. I owe you an apology." The father tilted his head slightly, waiting. "I mocked you," the CEO admitted, his voice cracking. "I judged you because of your clothes, your shoes, the way you looked. And yet, when it mattered most, you were the only one who stood up. You saved lives tonight. You saved me. And he paused, swallowing hard. "I don't even know what to say." The father gave a small smile, squeezing his daughter's hand. "You don't need to say anything. Just remember this. Kindness costs nothing, but it can save everything. The words struck the CEO harder than any lecture ever could. He felt something shift deep inside, a weight of arrogance breaking apart, replaced with a clarity he hadn't known in years. He nodded slowly, almost reverently. "You're right, and I want to change. I want to do something that matters." He glanced toward the police car where the gunman sat hunched in the backseat, his face pressed against the glass. "His sister, I'll pay for her treatment. No, I'll do more. I'll start a program to help families drowning in medical bills. I have the resources. It's time I used them for something more than my own comfort." The father studied him for a long moment, then gave a simple nod. Then maybe tonight wasn't just about saving lives, it was about changing them. The CEO's eyes burned with unshed tears, his throat tightening. He extended his hand, not as a wealthy man offering charity, but as a humbled man seeking grace. The father shook it, firm and steady. Outside, the night air was cool, the chaos of the restaurant fading behind them. The little girl tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, did we win?" He crouched down, meeting her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we won because no one had to die. And because kindness always wins in the end." She smiled, hugging him tightly. And for the first time that night, the weight in the room lifted, leaving behind a story that every diner, every officer, and even a once arrogant CEO would carry for the rest of their lives. Because on that night, one man's calm response didn't just stop a tragedy, it lit a fire of compassion that spread farther than anyone could have imagined.